After President Joe Biden said he had no comment on the death toll due to the Maui wildfires, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre replied that he's deeply concerned.
On Hawaii, how does the White House respond to critics who have suggested that the president should not have been vacationing at the beach over the weekend as the Maui crisis became the worst wildfire in a century?
So a couple of things, and I've said this multiple times. The president is certainly deeply concerned about the people in Maui, to the point where he has mobilized a whole of government approach here, as he has done many times to deal with these wildfires in Hawaii. From the beginning, you've heard directly from the administrator. From day one, FEMA has been on the ground dealing with this. There's more than 300 personnel, FEMA personnel. We've talked about the 50,000 meals. We've talked about the 75,000 liters of water, the thousands of cots that are out there and blankets. And there is more than a dozen federal agencies who are dealing with this issue right now that we're currently seeing in Maui, and it is a devastating sight.
Meanwhile, Biden again dodged questions on Maui. Here's that.
You know, I was reminded yesterday that being perceived as responding poorly to a natural disaster can be a very politically damaging thing. Obviously, George W. Bush's response to Hurricane Katrina, the heck of a job, Brownie comment, really hurt him. Even among Republicans, it hurt him. He just seemed so out of touch. How is Joe Biden not doing the exact same thing right now?
I think he is, and I've seen advocates who are Hawaii-based making that exact case. The problem is that, unlike George W. Bush, Joe Biden has the mainstream media at his back in his defense. So while people who are directly affected by the tragedy are calling Biden out for not doing enough, for seemingly doing more to send money to Ukraine than to Hawaii, for offering, I think it's $700 per person, things like that, in Hawaii as compared to the billions that have been sent to Ukraine, linking the Hawaii aid to the Ukraine aid, you're getting very little criticism on the mainstream media that is specifically blaming Biden for his response, as opposed to generally talking about how the tragedy is tragic and generally talking about these pre-existing issues that are exacerbating the crisis. For example, the kind of voracious real estate industry behavior on the island, where some of the housing crisis that predated this wildfire was largely driven by out-of-state investors buying up properties to rent as Airbnb and vacation homes, many of which remain empty while so many Hawaiians are homeless with nowhere to live. So they'll talk about those kind of structural issues, which are very important, don't get me wrong, but there seems to be an unwillingness to really point the finger at Joe Biden or even really unpack what it is that he could be doing differently right now.
Karine Jean-Pierre actually got, in talking about it, she butchered both senators' names, Mazie Hirono and it's Brian Schatz, right? She called Hirono Horino and said and misgendered her as well.
Well, I mean, this is if that had happened in Hurricane Katrina, also the racial implications, like the way that mistreatment of Black people, I think in America particularly, kind of weighs heavy on people's heads. She would have been drawn and quartered for that kind of remark. And
remember
I think
when now right-wing commentator celebrity Kanye West? It was Kanye West, right? Who said that George W. Bush doesn't care about Black people while standing next to a mortified Mike Myers.
Yeah, I mean, that was back when Kanye was based, and his eccentricity and his
that's when he was woke. Now he's based.
His spatial non-awareness, his willingness to say
I found his eccentricities grating then as I do now, but that's just me.
In that moment, many of us felt like it was speaking truth to power. And it was a kind of courage that maybe isn't quite courage. It's just a lack of inhibitions, like a child screaming in a store. Is that really courageous?
We don't like Bush, and he's saying mean things about Bush, so we cheer him. And
No, it wasn't that he was saying mean things about Bush. It was that people were stranded on the roofs of buildings, like dying in droves and starving to death and having no very delayed federal response in a way that we could all see because there were choppers in the air being beamed down at people who are in conditions that look like something you would expect out of a different part of the world. And Kanye West, I would argue, outside of his rap lyrics, has never been the most able or articulate person in terms of putting his thoughts and feelings into words. But in that moment, he articulated something that many Americans felt. And that was valuable. And I think it really did come from a place of honest concern about what was going on for the citizens of New Orleans, who were a population that even before Hurricane Katrina had been neglected, including from an infrastructural perspective, because it was that failure to update the levees that were protecting specifically the low-income parts of New Orleans that led to the tragedy, and that led to the tragedy specifically hitting the poorest parts of that city. And again, we're seeing some of this in Maui. There's arguments that are being made about the pattern of construction, the environmental harms that have happened on the island as a consequence of the tourist boom that have enabled a wildfire like this to spread in a way that it never has done historically in a lush, verdant, tropical paradise normally. There's a conversation about why it is that so many billionaires have homes on the island and have bought up all this land, while now all of the locals are squeezed even further in terms of their ability to find a place to live that's affordable. I have a very good friend from college who's Hawaiian, and who has she's a great job and she's a dentist and all this, but even in that context, the cost of living there, the conditions that people who are actually from Hawaii that aren't just dropping in for tourist reasons and who also aren't Oprah or Mark Zuckerberg, it's just a very expensive place to live.
Some in-demand real estate
and
there.
It's being driven up.
It's a beautiful island. People want a vacation there.
Right. So the people of Hawaii elect to run Hawaii, they have the option to elect a leadership that does something about preserving some of the land for people who actually live there and prioritizing them over out-of-state investors who buy up a bunch of properties that lay empty for much of the year because they're purely being used for tourist purposes. So we have markets and we also have a government, and people in Hawaii have the ability to elect a government that protects their interests, not the bottom line interests of the Marriott family.
I guess they can do that if they want. And if there are zoning issues or something going on that's probably artificially preventing things from being built anyway, I would oppose that. But otherwise, I think if you buy the land, you should be able to
apparently right
only
now,
vacation there 3 times a year if that's what you want.
Apparently what's happening now is that a lot of people who have lost their homes are being approached by investors in the context of this tragedy who are trying to swoop in and say, well, I'll give you this amount of money and you can rebuild elsewhere if I can have this land.
That sounds like a great idea.
And so there's a concern that this kind of disaster exploitation is further marginaling folks, and that they're going to be more squeezed the less federal support they have to be able to.
Exploitation, I say people making a voluntary, mutually beneficial exchange.
I hear you loud and clear. So the question is whether or not the government is tacitly enabling that kind of behavior by not offering citizens any alternative but to have to take this outside money that will make Hawaii no longer populated by any Hawaiians. Just a giant Club Med.
I guess might be where we're headed. Well, we will have more Rising right after this.